Hey, this is Jack, and this video is Serena versus Federer, the reality of men versus women in tennis. This is a reaction video, and you will have noticed if you've been in any online spaces that talk about the differences and similarities between men and women, that Elite Sports is one of the places that they often go to. So please stay to the end of this video because I'm going to say some stuff that I think will offer a simple reconciliation of some perspectives in this space so that we can honor what is true, but also speak respectfully and sensitively and, in a sense, bridge the divide. So let's get right into it. I'm going to bring up this video here and we are going to rock and roll. This is Serena Williams.
For me, tennis and men's tennis and women's tennis are completely almost two separate sports. So I'm like, if I were to play Andy Murray, I would lose 6-0, 6-0 in 5 to 6 minutes, maybe 10 minutes, because it's true. It's true. It's a completely, it's a completely different sport. The men are a lot faster, and they serve harder, they hit hard. It's just a different game, and I love to play women's tennis. And I only want to play girls because I don't want to be embarrassed. I would not do the tour. I wouldn't do Billie Jean any justice. So Andy, stop it. Yeah. I'm not gonna let you kill me.
So this is Serena on David Letterman, and now what I want to bring you up is a clip that got John McEnroe in trouble, where he was talking about something broadly similar. So for those of you that don't know John McEnroe,
you can't be serious, man. You cannot be serious. That ball was on the line. Chalk flew up.
He was obviously a very significant and prominent male tennis. So this is John McEnroe, right? He's probably now in his 70s. He's still heavily involved in tennis. Serena had become sort of maybe like the greatest female tennis player of all time because she had won the greatest number of Grand Slams. I think that would be the main metric. But let's let him explain. He's here on the sorry, it's not The View. This is CBS Morning with Charlie Rose before Me Too, I guess.
What's new?
All right,
What's going on?
Let's just start with the elephant in the room.
That's right.
Why was it necessary for you to say that anybody, Serena, couldn't beat the 700th player on the men's circuit?
As you know well enough, Charlie, I've respect Serena very much so, okay? And I was simply calling her on an NPR, which supposedly you're supposed to, this is where you can say it like it is and you're going to get honest feedback. She's the greatest female player that ever lived. Then the lady said to me, I don't remember which one, but she said, why did you say woman? Why don't you just say the greatest, tennis player that ever lived? And so then I felt the need, however, unfortunately, I'm probably to defend myself. I don't know, just say what I really felt. I mean, which is about what I think she would be. I think you're referring to the fact that I said she'd be about 700 in the world.
Yeah.
Right.
I've got a solution, Gail, though, because I know that you're friendly with Serena, and I think at least until yesterday,
right now.
I'm just waiting. Would you like to apologize?
No. But the offer is this, is because it seems in tennis, unlike other sports, that they're always asking about how they always ask me how I would do for someone. Why isn't this old bag John McEnroe, how would he do against Serena? Why don't you combine, just solve the problem? I'm sure the men would be all for this. The men and women play together. And then we don't have to guess.
So here we've got this compare and contrast, right? You've got Serena Williams saying that she absolutely does not want to play the men. She doesn't want to play Andy Murray, right? Who was, a very strong player in his day, the Brit, a Wimbledon champion. Certainly not a Nadal, a Federer, or Djokovic, but a Grand Slam winner. And that she would lose 6-0, 6-0, right? And then you've got John McEnroe refusing to say that she's the greatest player of all time because he's thinking, I know if she went up against men, to her very own admission, that she would really struggle against the top men in the world. What's your sense of this? What's your perspective on this, right? I have been disappointed by how many times I hear people who want to talk about the differences between men and women using elite sports as the backbone of their argument, right? Because what we tend to know is that the distribution within a population is often on a bell curve. And when it comes to physical stuff and maybe certain trait stuff like aggressiveness, that the bell curve distribution, so here's a bell curve and then here's another bell curve. So the bell curve distribution between men and women, the male one would tend to be slightly to the right, right? Sort of meaning that there's a decent amount of overlap, But at the extremes, on one extreme, you're going to get more women, and the other extreme, you're going to get more men. And so when you take something like elite sports, which is, a very, 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 very small percentage of the population, right? This is an elite occupation. That when it comes to being, for instance, the strongest, the most strong people in the world, right? The tens or hundreds of most strong people, typically nearly all, if not all of them, are going to be men. Right? Or if it comes to something like tennis, the most elite players in the world are nearly all, if not all, going to be men. Right? None of that is to take away from Serena or anyone else's achievement, right? Because it could be that Serena, by her achievement, is the greatest tennis player of all time, right? Her level of dominance in women's tennis may have surpassed the level of dominance of, a Federer or a Nadal or a Djokovic, right? And even as I say that, I'm like, well, perhaps it did, because there's really a question between those three as who's most dominant. But my understanding is that in Serena's day, she was absolutely the most dominant tennis player. But if you're talking about the actual ability to be on the court, now bear in mind, right? Serena's going to beat nearly any guy in the world at tennis, right? We're just talking about these top, one to few hundred guys that maybe would give her a run around on the court. So said differently, you can't take an elite or very rare circumstance and then apply it to the whole, right? So you can't, I've seen these videos where they show, now there's this, you might've seen this track competition, right? It's a 4x400 meter relay where they have 2 women and 2 men in a team of 4. And typically, yes, the men are significantly faster than the women, as would be predicted. If you look at the 400 meters men records and the 400 meters women's records, there's going to be a lot of difference. And so people will look at this to then make claims about average men and average women. Now, if you take something like the trait aggression, right? And you do a sort of random sampling. So if you just pick 2 people out of the population, a man and a woman, compare them, 6 times out of 10, the man will be more aggressive than the woman. But 4 times out of 10, the woman will be more aggressive than the man, right? So there's a definite differential, but it's also not that much. But if you went and if you said, okay, let's take the most aggressive men and the most aggressive women, and then we do a random pair up, the most aggressive guy is going to be more aggressive every time because it's at the elite distribution of that bell curve. This, by the way, it might help explain, and people have used this to explain, why is it that we get more men in prison, right? Because if you look at elite or non-usual levels, abnormal levels of criminality, men tend to dominate in that, right? Because it's that part of the bell curve distribution. Now, I'm not saying everything always has a bell curve distribution, but many of these things do. Do you start to get my point? Now, whether John McEnroe should be emphasizing this on Serena's big day, I don't know that he has to do that. I mean, it seems a little unfortunate because he was kind of challenged on something and then they went down the rabbit hole. But I think it would be great on Serena's big day that we're actually just celebrating Serena, right? We're not trying to make a comparison with some other time. We're not trying to make a comparison with men. We're actually just saying this is an unfathomable achievement. This is a kind of unique, once ever kind of achievement. And we want to absolutely put all the attention on that. That is a slightly different thing than having to pretend that if Serena was matched up against Andy Murray, that she would win that match, when by her own admission, she's saying that she would lose 6-0, 6-0 in relatively short order, right? A matter of minutes. So I'm curious what you make of this. I'm curious if there's things that you have sensed are true, but it's not politically correct to say them. And I'm curious if you've also noticed the opposite of that, which is there are things that might be true that actually it's just not really appropriate, or it's not very sensitive to mention those things at certain times, right? That actually we can honor what is true, but truth relationally is always a matter of emphasis, right? If it's your birthday and we're going and doing a birthday celebration circle, right? That's not where I bring up all the times that you have let me down, or I've struggled with you, or I haven't believed you, or I've lost faith in you, right? I don't have to dishonor that those things might be true for me, but it's a matter of choice and attention and discernment, right? So I would say John McEnroe, for whatever reason, didn't have a lot of discernment here. And actually, it might have been good for him to apologize for that choice of emphasis, right? It doesn't mean that he has to pretend something is true that's not true. I get that that's not a great place for anyone to have to stand, and he shouldn't have to stand there. But it is a question of choice and discernment, and maybe his discernment in that situation wasn't the best, right? Even if he was slightly snookered by the line of questioning for someone else. Anyways, that's what I'm seeing. I'm curious what you're seeing. What are you noticing about differences between men and women? It seems to me that on either side of the political spectrum, people tend to hypnotize to certain truths and not others, right? So for people who tend to be more culturally conservative, they're more keen to emphasize the differences between men and women. And it might be that for people who are more politically and culturally liberal, they're actually keen to emphasize the similarities, right? What we want to be doing, I think, is removing all the barriers to potential and achievement and aspiration opportunity for everyone, right? So there's not this sense of, oh, well, you're this gender, therefore you need to have this kind of career, or these kind of options aren't available to you. Even whilst we might say it's true that given full choice, there are definitely temperamental differences that seem to happen between men and women, including in the most egalitarian societies that we know of, the social democratic societies of, you know, Western and Northern Europe, that sometimes the things that we might, from a liberal agenda, be seen to be trying to flatten out, right? That we're going to get maybe more males into primary school teaching, right? And we're going to get more women into engineering. And absolutely, let's encourage and maybe even as a society incentivize those things. But that's slightly different than just left to their own devices. What are the pathways that people most want to pursue? Now, you could also say that we've had so many centuries of certain ways of doing things, certain indoctrinations, certain limitations placed on people, particularly women, that actually we would need, we would need a lot more data to really say accurately what do people with their native tendencies go towards, because there are pathways of aspiration and training and mentorship, subtle internalizations of systems of repression. All this stuff is possible, right? So it's not the most perfect experiment. But ideally, we want to be pro-women, pro-men, pro-boy, pro-girl, that everyone can push and achieve for their potential, that when there's science that's out there, or even the best social science, that we can acknowledge it. When there's lived experience, like someone like Serena Williams saying, yeah, I'm not going to play one of the best men in the world and pretend that it's actually going to be a game. Okay, that can be true. But at the same time, I have been surprised speaking with more culturally conservative women, for instance, who've never watched martial arts, that they can't wrap their head around the idea of a woman being a completely elite ninja assassin. And so I challenge them, as someone who has watched MMA for years, go watch an Amanda Nunes video and tell me that most men wouldn't be really intimidated and lose incredibly quickly if they went in the ring with her, right? So just because it's true that Amanda Nunes would lose to the most elite MMA male fighters, it's also true that Amanda Nunes would kick butt of nearly any guy in the world, right? So we have to be able to hold the nuance in these things. And most of us are, myself included, we're going to be conditioned by what we've seen in our social surround, right? So if you've grown up around women that do excellently with mixed martial arts, you're going to have that perception, that women can be incredible mixed martial artists. If you haven't grown up around women who are competing in combat sports, you might be a little uncalibrated in your ability to know what is possible there. So let me know if this is making sense. Please, you're welcome to push back. I ask you to push back civilly. These spaces exist to try to deepen our understanding and to bridge the divide and to have more possibility and aspiration for everyone. That is the hope here. So please leave your dogma at the door. Let's be in relationship with one another. And as always, I'm Jack. Thanks for being here.